10. Dangerous laundry. 27-year-old Taista Oliveira Rose was doing laundry at her home in Três de Maio, Brazil earlier this year when she got an electric shock from washing her machine and died. Her boyfriend, William Bottega, discovered her lifeless body and called emergency services, but it was too late to save her. Authorities announced that they were investigating the young mother's death, which they believe may have been caused by contact with an exposed wire. As far as anyone knew, she had no known pre-existing health conditions that may have contributed to the tragedy. Imagine doing something as simple as switching loads of laundry and getting killed for it. In the meantime, Bottega took to social media to express his profound grief over losing Thais, who left behind a 4-year-old daughter and was due to start a new job the very next day. He wrote in a post that it didn't seem real and concluded his thoughts with the statement, "Until we meet again." 9. Walking on the beach. During a trip to the Dominican Republic in 2019, a young Argentinian tourist named Melina Caputa accidentally stepped on a live wire while walking barefoot along the beach. The young woman collapsed from the powerful shock in front of her brothers and other relatives. EMTs were unable to revive her despite their best efforts. Initial findings suggested that Caputa, who just ascended a metal staircase before coming into contact with the wire, died from cardiorespiratory failure. The hotel where they were staying issued a statement shortly after her death, claiming that none of its properties had live wiring. The tragedy came amid a string of tourist fatalities in the country, which saw a 74% drop in tourism as the media reported on the strange deaths. 8. Work accident. 28-year-old father of 3, Jardin Nelson, lost both arms at a construction site in Auckland, New Zealand earlier this year. He was dismantling some scaffolding when a steel pole he was handling touched a live wire, administering a huge electrical shock through his entire body. Witnesses reported hearing a loud explosion and seeing a large fireball right before he collapsed. Nelson's cousin and co-worker held him in his arms until emergency responders arrived and took him to intensive care with severe internal and external injuries. He'd suffered from a heart attack, and 25 to 35% of his body was severely burned. Doctors ended up amputating both of Jardin's arms, an agonizing decision they had to make while he was in a medically induced coma. Nelson was brought out of the coma in early May, 2 weeks after the terrifying ordeal. When he learned of his injuries, he reportedly said, "I'm going to die." It's unclear whether or not he'll survive, and if he does, he'll most likely need years of rehab. According to the most recent update, he was expected to remain in critical care while doctors waited to see if he would pull through. The devastating accident has led many to wonder why there were live wires in such close proximity to workers and whether proper safety protocols were being followed. In a recent update, the property's owner, Heather Graham, said that she believed the wire was a hazard, but that the electrical company had given a go-ahead for the work to be performed anyway. The company has since tried passing the buck, saying that the tradesmen were performing according to standard industry practice and that an on-site safety observer was responsible for making sure nothing like this happened. 7. Charging. While eating dinner with his parents at their home in Maipu, Argentina earlier this year, 18-year-old Angel Andrada asked for permission to leave the table to plug his phone into charge. They said yes, only to hear a loud noise moments later. Andrada's parents rushed into the young man's bedroom and found him lying on the floor with burns. They rushed him to the emergency room, where he was pronounced dead on arrival. Doctors told the grief-stricken family that Angel had been fatally electrocuted and had received burns to his neck, wrists, and right foot. Investigators took statements from the teen's parents and examined the phone charger and the home's electrical outlets. In the meantime, Angel's relatives took to social media to express their heartbreak over the freak incident that caused his untimely death. 6. Don't go into the water. 23 years old James D'Angelo went swimming in Pennsylvania's Monongahela River at a marina in New Eagle during 4th of July celebrations last year. He went into the water alive, but was carried out lifeless. He was pronounced dead at a local hospital less than an hour after bystanders pulled him from the water. Shortly after the incident, investigators announced that D'Angelo's cause of death remained undetermined as they tried to get to the bottom of things, but they believe that it could have been caused by an electrical shock. According to what witnesses told officials, the man went underwater and failed to surface, at which point a concerned friend put on a life jacket and entered the water to search for him. D'Angelo's friend was also taken to the hospital after experiencing what he described as a horrible shock in the water. At the time, detectives were awaiting autopsy results before making any official announcements about whether D'Angelo's death was caused by something electrical. Following the tragedy, the US Coast Guard released a statement reminding the public of the hidden electrocution dangers that can come with swimming in fresh water, especially near marinas, where boats and other equipment can leak voltage into the water and kill a swimmer. It's extremely rare. There have only been around 80 cases nationwide, and can be prevented with several devices both on boats and at marinas, which stop electricity from electrifying the water. 5. Straight hair. A young Brazilian woman's life was cut short late last year when she was using a hair straightener. It's something many people do every day without a second thought, and Thamires de Consaio Silva was no exception. She went to straighten her hair at her home in the northeastern part of the country when the iron touched a part of her hair that was still wet and instantly delivered a deadly electrical shock. Silva's family members immediately summoned help, but emergency responders were unable to revive Thamires. Police said that they were looking into the tragedy, but that the teen's death may have been caused by her wet hair coming into contact with an exposed wire. The incident came just a few years after a 19-year-old college student named Joyce Gomez died while straightening her hair with an actual iron in the Indian state of Goa. At the time, she was home alone in the encampment of huts that she lived in with her mother, who was at work. The continuous barking of a dog prompted a neighbor to enter Joyce's hut, where they found her lying motionless on the floor. Joyce was rushed to a nearby hospital, where she was declared dead. Police ruled the cause as unnatural. 4. Sad karma. A 27-year-old foreign worker in Singapore decided in 2020 that it would be a good idea to steal some electrical cables from his job site at the National Police Service Department. Murugan Kothalam was not a trained electrician. He was just a driver who knew electricians who worked at the site. He got one of them to go along with a plan to cut and remove some cables, which the electricians were not authorized to do because the power was still on. The pair planned to split the profits, but they never reached that point because Kothalam was electrocuted. One of the electricians heard a ladder shaking and ran into the room where Kothalam was cutting wires alone and found the man's body completely still with his upper body above the ceiling panel. Efforts to resuscitate Kothalam failed, and he died a few hours later at a local hospital. Investigators found that he'd touched the non-insulated part of a pair of wire cutters while cutting on a live wire. He used his other hand to grab a metal ceiling board frame, forming a closed circuit that delivered a fatal shock. As a result of his decision to violate workplace policy and the law, he left behind a young son he'd never even met. 3. Shock devices. When electricity goes wrong, it's usually by accident. But one Massachusetts school and residential facility for developmentally disabled children and adults uses electrical shock devices to correct disruptive behaviors among its clientele who suffer from intellectual, emotional, behavioral, and psychiatric problems. It's the only school in the entire nation to resort to this type of discipline. The FDA claims that the treatment can cause long-lasting trauma, and the United Nations has described it as a form of torture. But the school defended the decades-old practice, claiming that the shocks have stopped patients from harming themselves or others when all other measures to calm them down have failed. And some of the patients' families have agreed. Clients who are subjected to the treatment wear a device called a graduated electronic decelerator on their arm or leg. When they become aggressive or behave in unacceptable ways, staff members use a remote control to trigger a 2-second shock, kind of like a shock collar on a dog that barks too much. There are currently 55 students, all adults, who wear the device, which must be approved by a judge. Some have worn it for decades. The FDA attempted to ban the practice, citing health and ethical concerns, but a federal court ruled last year that the school could continue to use the behavior-modifying electrical devices. The center's lawyer, Michael Flamia, told the New York Times that the seemingly inhumane treatment, known as aversive therapy, has stopped patients from extreme self-harm and violent attacks on others. In the past, however, the school has been accused of shocking students in less than extreme situations. a young man was restrained and shocked dozens of times over a several-hour period in 2002 after he refused to take his jacket off. Another former patient told NBC News that he was shocked for struggling to wake up in the morning, which was not on the list of approved reasons for disciplining him. For now, the controversial treatment continues as those personally affected by it remain deeply divided over whether it's a life-saving tool or a dehumanizing form of abuse. 2. 230 volts. The lives of one family would change forever in 2018 when young Denisha Woods touched a garden faucet and received a near-fatal dose of 230 volts of electricity. She was turning the tap off while standing barefoot on the wet ground, causing a live current to flow into her body. At first, doctors didn't think she'd survive, but when they turned off her life support machine, she continued to breathe on her own. Unfortunately, Denisha is severely brain damaged, nearly blind, and incapable of doing nearly anything on her own. She's fed through a tube and will need costly round-the-clock care for the rest of her life. The Western Australia state government determined that a faulty connection was to blame for Denisha's close brush with death. Denisha's mother, Lacey Harrison, had called the company just a half-hour before the incident to let them know that the family had experienced several concerning electrical shocks at the property. They told Lacey that an electrician would be by later that night or early the next day, but by the time the near-fatal electrocution occurred, it was too late. Investigators concluded that a corroded conductor had enabled the live current to form, but they were unable to determine what caused the damage. The public housing property where Denisha was living when she was shocked has since been demolished, and the government reassured the public that it's implemented additional safety measures to prevent any more needless tragedies from happening. The girl's family pursued $3 million in compensation for the lifelong medical care Denisha now faces. Their claim was denied, and the government instead offered $1 million, which Lacey described as deplorable considering the circumstances. With Denisha's extensive needs, it's impossible for Lacey to work, leaving her financially strapped while she tends to her daughter almost 24/7. An investigative report failed to blame any specific entity for what happened, leaving the family with few options for ensuring Denisha's long-term care. They've accused the government of failing to clean up their mess and take responsibility for their role in the unfortunate ordeal. 1. The storm. During a recent storm in North Huntington, Pennsylvania, 5 homes and 1 resident were struck by lightning. A teenage girl named Gianna Scaramuzzo was inside her house when she felt an electrical charge enter her body through her pinky and exit through her leg. Paramedics were called to the scene and determined that she was most likely unharmed based on her blood pressure, which was normal, and the fact that Gianna said she was shaken but physically okay. To be sure, the EMTs performed an electrocardiogram test on the team and sent the results to a local hospital for analysis. In the ordeal's aftermath, Gianna told local station WTAE that she was uneasy and still in shock. No pun intended. The family's home sustained considerable damage from the lightning strike, but all things considered, they were incredibly lucky that their daughter was not among the estimated 10% of lightning strike victims who die. Thanks for watching. Would you rather find out that the electrical wiring in your home is dangerously outdated and that you had to move out until it was fixed, or have your front door cave in during a blizzard from the weight of the snow outside? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.